Imagine stepping into the spotlight with everyone around you convinced you're destined for greatness, only for a single cruel twist of fate to upend every plan you ever had. That was Susan Peters' reality. Born in July of 1921, she was the first child of Robert Carnahan and his wife Abby, living an unremarkable childhood in Spokane, Washington, alongside her parents and younger brother. At that point, nothing hinted at an impending rise to cinematic glory, and no one could have foreseen the immense tragedies lurking just around the corner. Little Susan's first shock came at age 7, when she was blindsided by a devastating car accident that took her father's life. This single incident shattered the family's peaceful life and forced them to relocate not once but twice, first to Portland and then to Los Angeles, where they moved in with Susan's French grandmother. Ironically, it was this move that eventually set her on a collision course with fame and misfortune alike. From a young age, Susan showed an empathetic and nurturing spirit. She wasn't the type of kid who spent hours daydreaming about becoming a movie star, collecting posters of glitzy celebrities, or memorizing lines from her favorite films. On the contrary, her main aspiration was to become a doctor. She believed that she could make a lasting difference in people's lives, and, in her youthful optimism, she came up with a rather ingenious plan. She knew actors could earn decent money if they were successful, and so she decided she might pay for medical school by taking a shot at performing. When it came time to choose electives and her options boiled down to cooking versus drama, Susan couldn't resist the potential windfall an acting career might offer. She enrolled in drama class, fully intending to save up every penny for her ultimate dream of practicing medicine. It was a deliberate gamble, but life had surprises in store that would steer her in an entirely different direction. Susan was also blessed with striking physical beauty. She had a delicate, almost angelic presence that could stop people in their tracks, a quality that ended up being more valuable than any polished acting technique she might have learned in class. A talent scout once dropped by to observe her drama course, and although her teachers expressed concerns that Susan wasn't the strongest performer in the room, it didn't matter. The second he laid eyes on her, it was like he'd discovered a hidden gem. Her luminous face and effortless grace were enough to get her a screen test. When she graduated from Hollywood High in 1939, Susan did so alongside several future luminaries, including Jason Robards, Sheila Ryan, and Dorothy Morris, names that would eventually become fixtures in the industry. Standing among them, she must have felt a rush of potential, that intoxicating sense that she was part of an emerging generation of fresh talent. Yet no one could have predicted the zigzagging path her career would follow. While her classmates would manage to carve out steadier paths in show business, Susan's journey would take on a much darker tone. Things started out promisingly enough. Thanks to a family friend named Salah Fertil, who happened to be a writer with Hollywood connections, Susan snagged introductions to a variety of industry movers and shakers. Among them was the esteemed director George Cukor, who decided to give her a shot in a film titled Susan and God, starring none other than Joan Crawford. It was the kind of opportunity most newcomers would have killed for, even if it was just a small part. Still, for a young woman who'd never truly dreamed of the silver screen, that fleeting background role was a foot in the door. One moment, she was just a wide-eyed hopeful among countless other aspiring actors. The next, she was standing on set with Joan Crawford in a film directed by George Cukor. Though her star appeared to be rising, it was her personal life that foreshadowed the darkest chapter. She fell in love, married, and for a brief period seemed destined for a balanced existence, one that included both professional success and personal contentment. But fate had a cruel twist in store. During what should have been a serene, idyllic hunting trip, Susan and her husband found themselves in a horrific accident that forever changed the trajectory of her life. As the weeks turned into months, hope seemed to slip further from her grasp. The entertainment industry, known for its relentless pace, had little patience for setbacks. Casting directors and producers moved on to the next fresh face, and the rumor mill churned with talk that Susan was done for, that she'd never be able to return to the screen in the capacity she once had. Worse yet, her private world collapsed beneath the pressure of endless doctor's visits, difficult rehabilitation sessions, and the heartbreaking realization that her marriage was straining under the weight of tragedy. If you've ever assumed that simply showing up for a background role in a Hollywood production is a piece of cake, think again. Because for Susan Peters, it turned into a moment that nearly knocked her off her feet. All she had to do was stand among the partygoers in a couple of scenes and blend into the festive chaos. She wasn't asked to utter a single line. The only real requirement was her physical presence. Yet the instant she laid eyes on that imposing camera lens, for the first time her nerves got the better of her, and she fainted on set. It may have been an embarrassing ordeal in the moment, but it also became one of those formative experiences that would give her a taste of the grit this business demanded. Once she got back on her feet, she found new determination coursing through her veins, convinced that if she could handle this mortifying introduction to Hollywood, she could probably handle a whole lot more. Driven by that new spark, Peters refused to sit around hoping for a golden ticket to land in her lap. Instead, she hustled, willingly accepting every screen test that rolled her way, even as she labored to refine her acting abilities. Fortunately, Warner Bros. Recognized this blossoming talent, or at least they recognized her potential to become an on-screen asset, and decided to offer her a contract. For many aspiring actors, securing a studio contract in that era was the dream scenario, the type of opportunity that could skyrocket a career. But for Susan, it also spelled the beginning of a curious love-hate relationship. In those early months under contract, Peters appeared in what you might call the cinematic equivalent of cameo roles. Blink and you miss it spots that gave her a sliver of screen time in Warner Bros. Films. Sometimes she'd be perched in the background of a room or crossing the screen for a fleeting moment. Often, you had to really look to spot her. Then came her first official, credited break, a small part in the feature film Santa Fe Trail. Although it was hardly the starring role of a lifetime, that project gave her slightly more visibility. She may not have had much dialogue, but at least audiences saw her name in the credits. In an industry full of cutthroat competition, even small victories like that were worth celebrating. Yet, in a strange turn of events, the visibility she gained didn't pave the way to bigger or more meaningful offers. Instead, it seemed to lead nowhere. Studio executives soon discovered that Peters wasn't content to be just another smiling face. She had opinions, boundaries, and sometimes a tendency to get overwhelmed by the intense publicity machine. When it came time for press interviews for Santa Fe Trail, she locked herself in her room and flat out refused to come out to meet the journalists waiting for her. Later on, she acknowledged that she regretted making such a scene. She understood that she might have sabotaged her own chances for good PR. Still, at the time, she was simply a young woman grappling with a sudden onslaught of attention. Nonetheless, powerful figures in the studio system weren't exactly sympathetic to displays of anxiety or what they might have called temperament. As a consequence, she began noticing that opportunities were drying up. Directors who had previously seemed intrigued by her potential were now turning a blind eye. Scripts that might have gone her way found other more cooperative actors instead. Her predicament became all the more glaring when she started racking up screen tests, lots of them, earning the unfortunate distinction of possibly being one of the most screen-tested actresses on the Warner Brothers lot. Time after time, she'd show up, deliver her lines, strike her poses, and be told, "We'll be in touch." Yet the calls barely ever came. Occasionally, the studio tossed her tiny roles in bigger pictures, but those parts were often so small that it hardly mattered whether she did a fantastic job. She never got the chance to sink her teeth into a truly meaty role that could prove to everyone she was more than just an extra with a few lines. The real heartbreak came with one film in particular, the 1941 release, Sergeant York. She tested for it, and according to Photoplay magazine, her performance was spot on, nothing short of perfect. Yet, when she didn't land the role, the official explanation was that she was too young. The irony? The role was later given to Joan Leslie, who was younger than Peters. Salt in the wound, the film went on to become a major box office triumph, a victory she had to watch from the sidelines, wondering what might have been if the studio had taken a chance on her. Naturally, an experience like that can shake a person's confidence. There she was, diligently performing test after test, only to see her name passed over for roles she had seemingly nailed. Disillusionment set in, and she began to question whether she'd made the right choice by jumping into acting in the first place. Maybe her dream of using acting as a stepping stone toward other ambitions, like becoming a doctor, would forever remain just that, a dream. But Hollywood is nothing if not a labyrinth of surprising opportunities. And just when things looked their bleakest, a new door opened. Another studio, MGM, and director S. Sylvan Simon extended a lifeline. They offered her a part in a project called Tish, and not just any part, a supporting role that was actually visible enough to demonstrate her capabilities on screen. She auditioned, won the role, and started filming in 1942. After everything that happened at Warner Brothers, it was a breath of fresh air. Here was a chance for a genuine restart, free from the baggage of her difficult label. Although the role in Tish wasn't going to thrust her overnight into the pantheon of top-tier leading ladies, the mere fact that MGM was willing to take a risk on her gave her renewed hope. Perhaps her forthrightness, her sense of self, and her refusal to be just another contract player who followed studio rules without question would finally be interpreted as assets rather than liabilities. Perhaps this would be her chance to show a new audience and a new set of executives that she had the range, dedication, and star power to rise above background roles and cameo appearances. Despite the setbacks and humiliations, Peters never fully abandoned her dreams. She soldiered on, hoping that if she just kept putting in the work, eventually she'd find the right project to cement her name in the public's mind. Getting a chance to film Tish felt like a small but crucial victory, an indication that maybe the tide was finally turning. After so many false starts, fainting spells, and locked dressing room incidents, she had a tangible sign that some people in the industry still believed in her ability. And the question that began to hover in the air was simple yet tantalizing. Would this new chapter be the breakthrough she had been waiting for all along? Sometimes in Hollywood, the line between success and obscurity is more fragile than we'd like to admit. One role, one test, or even one moment of studio politics can determine whether an actor ascends to stardom or remains a bit player in someone else's story. Whether Tish would be the turning point she craved remained to be seen, but at least she finally had a new platform. Away from a studio that never truly understood the woman behind the luminous face. From the outside looking in, it appeared that Susan Peters' luck had finally begun to shift in her favor. Even though her film Tish didn't set the box office on fire right out of the gate, critics and insiders still recognize something special in its execution, and more importantly, in Peters herself. But just as significant as her on-screen success was the other reward Tish bestowed upon her: the birth of a whirlwind romance that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. During production, Peters found herself paired with actor Richard Quine, who happened to be playing her character's love interest. Though the role didn't require extensive emotional fireworks, the two found themselves swept up in real chemistry as soon as the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, it was a chemistry they couldn't ignore. Quine, however, was not exactly free to pursue a new relationship. He was already married. Before they had time to fully process what was happening, an intense affair ignited, carried along by stolen moments and unwavering excitement. Peters, who was riding high on the confidence of a newly minted film contract, found Quine's attention irresistible. For a man like Quine, who had seen his share of co-stars come and go, there was something magnetic about Peters that he simply couldn't brush aside. Her poised beauty, mesmerizing eyes, and the quiet determination that simmered under her gentle exterior were qualities that seemed to set her apart. When Quine's divorce became final, he and Peters stepped forward as a couple, unapologetic about the relationship that had blossomed behind the scenes. Her contract with the MGM meant new roles were being offered to her, and she was no longer stuck on the sidelines as an extra or with a fleeting cameo. Meanwhile, in her personal life, she was deeply in love and beginning to believe she had found her happily ever after. The pair worked on another film together, one made even more special by the fact that they announced their engagement during production. And, as if her career needed more momentum, it was that very project that led to Random Harvest, a movie that would push Peters further into the spotlight. It seemed as though everything was falling perfectly into place. Standing in front of cameras, signing autographs, and dreaming of a new life with Quine, Peters felt unstoppable. Behind the scenes, she was hard at work planning her wedding. In November of 1943, she walked down the aisle in a private ceremony at a church in Los Angeles. Loved ones gathered to watch them exchange vows, and Peters made a breathtaking entrance in her great-grandmother's wedding gown, an heirloom that underscored the depth of her family's love and her own sense of tradition. The newlyweds were euphoric, surrounded by the glow of well-wishers and a legion of fans who had followed Peters's career transition from near obscurity to blossoming star. It was the stuff of dreams. Two beautiful Hollywood personalities standing side by side at the peak of their youthful promise. Not long after the wedding, Peters and Quine decided they deserved a break from the noise of the film industry. A hunting trip sounded like the perfect chance to unplug and spend a few days enjoying nature's tranquility. They had no reason to suspect it would end in catastrophe. One moment, Peters was reaching for a hunting rifle, supposedly picking it up for a friend, and the next a shot rang out. In a horrifying accident, the gun fired and the bullet tore through her abdomen, causing irreversible damage to her spine. Chaos erupted. Peters collapsed, and as blood soaked through her clothing, she fought the rising tide of shock that threatened to consume her. She later recalled a sense of detachment, almost as if she were hovering outside her own body, urging herself to remain calm, to focus on living. Quine, frantic with fear, raced to get her medical help. The situation was grim, yet they both clung to the hope that doctors might be able to undo the worst of the damage. Emergency surgery did indeed save her life. However, when the procedures were done and the doctors emerged with test results, the news was crushing. Peters was paralyzed from the waist down. The bullet's path had proved too damaging to her spinal cord, and there would be no simple fix, no quick bounce back to normal. For someone whose entire world revolved around physical movement, walking onto film sets, rehearsing choreographed scenes, turning gracefully for the camera, this outcome felt like a nightmare that just days earlier she would have insisted could never happen to her. Still, in those first few days, hope died hard. She was alive after all, and perhaps that fact alone was reason enough to fight. Friends, loved ones, and even fans sent letters and flowers insisting that she would triumph over this obstacle the way she had triumphed over so many others in her life. In the weeks following her accident, she showed flashes of her old determination. Rumors flew that she had managed to take a few shaky steps, that her doctors at Los Angeles Hospital were encouraged. She put on a brave face for interviews, eager to show that she had not given up. She told anyone who would listen that she intended to stand again, to walk again, perhaps even to return to work. But medical science can be a harsh judge of optimism, and her doctors soon discovered complications that refused to yield to therapy. The promising steps she had taken slipped away in a heartbreaking relapse. Her body simply wasn't able to sustain the progress she so dearly wanted to believe in. The hospital insisted on keeping her for 7 long months of treatments, examinations, and more than a few tears of frustration. She endured repeated tests, sometimes dealing with crushing disappointment as the progress she'd prayed for failed to materialize. When she was finally discharged, doctors made it clear that if her paralysis hadn't improved substantially by this point, the likelihood of any future breakthrough was slim. She might have been out of the hospital, but she was far from free. Simple tasks now loomed as major challenges. Day-to-day independence felt like a distant memory. Quine tried his best to be supportive, torn between his demanding career and his new role as caretaker for a wife who'd once been an image of health and grace. Hollywood, meanwhile, wasn't known for its patience. Producers and directors who had once clamored for Peters' availability found themselves unsure of how or whether to feature a wheelchair-bound actress in their films. As much as she needed to relearn how to move and function, she also had to battle the perception that she was no longer a viable leading lady. Gone were the days when cinematographers would talk about capturing her every angle to accentuate her striking looks. With the loss of her mobility, an invisible barrier sprang up between her and the roles that might have been hers. Yet the same tenacity that had gotten her this far refused to let her simply fade away. She continued to show up, to make an effort at auditions, to see if perhaps there was a director out there who valued her talent enough to give her a chance. No sooner had she returned home, still grappling with the aftermath of her devastating spine injury, than she experienced one of the most heartbreaking losses imaginable. Her mother, Abby Carnahan, passed away in late 1945. It was a cruel twist of fate, robbing her of the very person who had stayed by her hospital bed day after day, hoping against hope that her daughter might somehow fully recover. Abby's death felt like a weight pressing down on Peters' chest, an emotional wound that proved nearly as agonizing as her physical injury. By all accounts, the accident had strengthened their bond, creating a sort of siege mentality where they both rallied around each other. Peters frequently told reporters that she believed Quine loved her even more now in her wheelchair than he had before. She marveled at how patient he was, how carefully he learned to assist her with daily tasks, and how willing he was to adapt his own routines to hers. Meanwhile, Quine publicly praised his wife's unbreakable spirit, claiming she was more compelling and, in his view, more beautiful than ever. Before her accident, she had proclaimed more than once that after a few more film roles, she wanted to retire and raise a large family. For her, having multiple children was part of a deeply cherished plan. But reality could be brutal. Her doctors made it clear that carrying a pregnancy would be impossible after the damage to her spine. Rather than drowning in sorrow or letting that news crush her, Peters and Quine decided to adopt. In April 1946, they welcomed a 10-day-old baby boy named Timothy into their home. Peters's pride and excitement glowed in every interview she gave at the time. She described the adoption as evidence that God always leaves a loophole to crawl through when trouble strikes. Timothy became living proof that the universe could still deal her a kind hand. Yet even with a new baby in the house, Peters craved more. She gave interviews, inviting readers into her world through an ongoing series of articles in Photoplay magazine, often focusing on her friendships with other celebrities. She also hinted at her ambitions beyond film, mentioning a potential career in radio, as well as the possibility of writing more extensively. Above all, she wanted to act again. She had tasted success in front of a camera, and she felt she still possessed a talent worth showcasing. The question was, would the studios give a wheelchair-bound actress a fair shot? Initially, Peters tried to propose projects that might accommodate her new circumstances. She pitched ideas involving real-life women who had faced physical challenges yet thrived regardless. Women like singer Connie Boswell, who had also been paralyzed, or the bedridden journalist Nellie Revel. But in spite of her best efforts, the studio that originally held her contract didn't share her vision. Executives brushed off her suggestions, either uninterested in the narrative she pitched or unconvinced that audiences would respond. It was, in her eyes, yet another crushing setback, and it seemed eerily similar to the way Warner Brothers had overlooked her before. But this time, the rejection stung even more because now she wasn't just fighting for professional validation. She was battling the stereotype that a disabled actress might not be bankable. Her contract was dissolved, and she turned her attention to Columbia Pictures. Columbia, perhaps seeing an underexploited niche, or perhaps genuinely impressed by Peters's determination, decided to give her a chance. She zeroed in on an adaptation of The Sign of the Ram, a novel that focused on a disabled woman who manipulates everyone around her. In the lead-up to production, Peters seemed genuinely optimistic. She talked about how the storyline provided a rare opportunity for a Hollywood actress to portray a complex character with physical limitations, not merely a stock role or a pitiable figure. She envisioned proving her critics wrong by showing that true talent transcends physical ability. Now, she was not only the lead actress, but also an advocate for people who feared that a disability might permanently bar them from meaningful work. When The Sign of the Ram finally premiered, however, it failed to gain traction at the box office. Critics, perhaps unable to connect with the story or possibly unimpressed by the supporting elements, were lukewarm in their reviews. They didn't necessarily single Peters out for criticism. In fact, some mentioned that her performance was one of the film's few strong points, but the movie itself simply wasn't what audiences were looking for. For someone who had pinned so many hopes on this project, the disappointment was tangible. In interviews afterward, Peters tried to maintain a brave front, but it was difficult to mask her dissatisfaction at how poorly the film had been received. She had poured so much heart into a role that felt personal and meaningful, only to watch it fade away with neither critical acclaim nor commercial success to bolster her spirits. Outwardly, she and Richard Quine still appeared to be the loving, determined couple who had braved unimaginable challenges together. But in 1948, not long after her film wrapped, the marriage that was once a sanctuary fell apart in an instant. The news caught everyone by surprise. Friends and onlookers had no inkling of any trouble, so when Peters announced the separation, it left them reeling. Yet for Peters herself, it was not shocking at all. She claimed that Quine had become distant and at times outright cruel, sometimes refusing to speak to her for days. She never gave graphic details of his alleged mistreatment, and Quine himself stayed silent. By September of that year, the divorce was final, and Peters received custody of their son Timothy, along with child support of $300 a month. In the aftermath, Peters packed her belongings and moved to Lemon Cove, California, where her brother owned a cattle ranch. The plan was presumably to find some respite there, to gather strength in a peaceful countryside setting, but the medical advice she received did not align with the schedule she was determined to keep. Doctors had once told her she should limit any professional work to a single month a year, hoping it would help her body recuperate. She turned a deaf ear to that recommendation. With her usual stubborn determination, Peters appeared on stage and on television, pushing her physical limits in the hope that it might rekindle a career that had seemingly stalled. From the start, Susan Peters had always been petite, but after her hunting accident, her weight dropped to a dangerously low 80 pounds. In interviews and articles, she was candid about her unhealthy relationship with food, recalling how she sometimes stopped eating entirely whenever Quine subjected her to prolonged silent treatments. Instead of improving after moving in with her brother, her eating habits spiraled to an even darker place. Her last doctor's visit brought a grim confession. She told him plainly that she believed it would be better for everyone if she simply ceased to exist. It was a jarring statement from a woman once renowned for her spirited energy. Over the next 2 months, she set upon what can only be described as a horrifying course of action. She resolved to starve herself. By October of 1952, her body could take no more. Susan Peters passed away officially from a chronic kidney infection, yet her doctors openly acknowledged that the starvation and extreme dehydration she imposed on herself accelerated her end. In her final moments, only her brother and his wife were by her side. Together, they made arrangements for her burial at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, the same cemetery where her mother, Abby, lay at rest. She was just 31 years old. It is almost painful to imagine how quickly the promise of a Hollywood career and a bright personal future unraveled after her disastrous hunting trip. Initially, when the accident left her paralyzed, she seemed determined to triumph over misfortune, clinging to the possibility of new roles and a loving family life. Her sheer grit was undeniable, and for a time it fueled her every move. Adopting Timothy, plotting a return to the screen, mustering the courage to leave one studio for another to find a role she could shine in, despite her disability. Yet in the end, the world watched that determination crumble under the crushing weight of disappointment, heartbreak, and relentless physical struggles. What makes Susan Peters' story so haunting is how swiftly and tragically her light was extinguished. Only a few years separated her from the heady days when she was heralded as an ingenue to watch, set apart by her understated beauty and a quiet perseverance that insiders believed would carry her far. Even in smaller roles, she seemed to glow with potential, drawing attention to herself without uttering a single line. Yet a single bullet on a hunting trip changed her trajectory forever, leading to a slow-moving heartbreak that overshadowed every earlier triumph. Her life asked difficult questions. How much heartbreak can one soul endure? Could a better support system have saved her from the final despair that drove her to starve herself? Or was the mountain of accumulated losses, her mother's death, her divorce, her professional setbacks, simply too large to conquer? There is no definite answer, but the haunting image of a once promising actress slipping away in near solitude speaks to an overlooked reality in the film world. Behind every camera-ready smile can lurk a turmoil that no amount of glamour can erase. Today, fans of classic cinema still stumble across Susan Peters' films and find themselves drawn to her rare blend of grace and earnestness. They see flickering on screen a woman who, for a moment in time, captured everything. that Hollywood dreamed of showcasing, only to have it stolen in an instant. Some remember her primarily for Random Harvest, a film that teased the heights she might have reached, while others know her for The Sign of the Ram, her brave but ultimately ill-fated attempt to find a place in an industry that wasn't ready to accept a leading lady in a wheelchair. Regardless of which movie first introduces viewers to her aura, the reaction is often the same: heartbreak at the knowledge that her story ended so harshly. And so at age 31, Susan Peters' journey came to a close, sealed in the hush of a quiet memorial service. She left behind a short yet impactful legacy, a testament to a talent that shone brightly, if only for a fleeting interval. It's impossible not to think about what might have been, the roles she could have taken on, the joy she might have found in motherhood, the impact her spirit could have had if she'd survived to see a more inclusive era. Instead, we are left with a bittersweet memory of a gifted actress caught in the cruel crosshairs of fate, determined to fight her way back into the limelight, yet ultimately surrendering in the most tragic way. Her story endures as a somber reminder that beneath Hollywood's glitter, real lives and real sorrows unfold, sometimes leaving us with questions too heartbreaking to answer. Thank you for spending this time reflecting on Susan Peters. If you found this story meaningful, please consider leaving a like, subscribing for more, and we'll connect again soon.